didn't relish the duties of his servants, who would have to see to hot horses and grimy raiment before they could so much as contemplate slaking their own thirst. The nobleman who had arrived earlier in the day had been much more relaxed. He had more men, but had ridden in on a loose rein, one arm resting casually on his pommel. Everything about him had proclaimed a man who knew his own worth and had nothing to prove. Something about him was vaguely familiar to Elias, and the thought that he had seen him before was still niggling at his brain. It was a cause of some irritation, like a stone in a shoe. Elias liked everything in order, from his workman's tools to his own mind. A question from one of his men dragged both thoughts and eyes away from the world below, and he turned back to the task in hand with a sigh. Miles Fitzhugh dismounted before the guest hall, head held proud. He rather ostentatiously removed his gauntlets and beat them against his leg to loosen the dust, but then ruined the effect by sneezing. Once the convulsion had passed, he issued terse commands to his long-suffering grooms, who led the horses away to the stables. The young man permitted himself a small smile, enjoying the chance to command others. In his home shire, and away from the entourage of the powerful Earl of Leicester, where he was only one of the young men serving as squires, he could flaunt his own noble birth and status. He had not the insight to realize that this pool, in which he saw himself as the biggest fish, was nothing greater than a stagnant puddle. He entered the cool gloom of the guest hall, his eyes unaccustomed to the low light, and collided with a tall, dark man who made no attempt to step aside. Fitzhugh was about to make his feelings known, but his eyes had now made their adjustment, and before the hard glare and raised brows at which he had to look up, remonstration withered on his lips. "You should be less hasty, my friend." The voice was languid, almost bored, but the word friend held a peculiar menace to it. Taking stock of the man's clothing, Miles Fitzhugh made a rapid alteration to his own manner. "My apologies, my lord." His voice was refined and precise, but with the deferential tone of one long used to service, and one also used to thinking up excuses swiftly. "My eyes have been dazzled by the sun." "Then all the more reason to proceed with caution." The tall man was at least a dozen years Fitzhugh's senior, and, by dress and bearing, far superior in rank to a squire, even one in the household of Robert de Beaumont, Earl of Leicester. Fitzhugh mumbled an apology and drew aside, almost pressing himself into the hard, cold stone of the whitewashed wall. The older man inclined his head and gave a tight smile as he passed out into the sunlight. The squire would have been galled to have seen how much broader the smile grew once he was in the open. "Jeez, you, was I ever that callow?" muttered Waleran de Grimont as he crossed the courtyard. His eyes were roving, sharp as a raven's, taking in everything going on around him. The usual routines within an abbey's walls were being carried out, as if the monastic world worked on a different level to the secular, aware of its existence but uninterested in its activities. The master of the children was leading his youngest charges to the precentor for singing practice. They followed him with eyes lowered, giving the casual observer the appearance of humility and obedience. De Grimont was amused to see that two lads towards the rear were elbowing each other surreptitiously, and another was picking up small stones and flicking them at a large, pudding-faced boy waddling along in front of him. The perpetrator sensed an adult gaze upon him, and he cast a swift glance in the direction of the tall, well-dressed lord. His eyes met those of de Grimont for an instant, and he grinned, correctly judging that the man would appreciate boldness. The nobleman gave an almost imperceptible nod, and the boy relaxed. The lord clearly remembered the misdeeds of his own youth. In the shade of the infirmary, a woman was in conversation with the guest-master. She had an air of competence and efficiency, and seemed perfectly at ease. She was dressed without ostentation, but the cloth of her gown was of fine quality. Her garb, thought de Grimont, was